On this month's First Person Podcast, episode 24, we sit down with Hazel Monforton to talk about Death of the Outsider. Hi, I'm Betsy. You can find me on Twitter at Betsy Bray.
I'm Rob Parker. You can find me on Twitter at RobotParking, and you can also follow First Person Scholar on Twitter at FPS Weekly.
So, we have a special guest this month, and I'm really excited to be having a conversation with her. So I was kind of hoping, Hazel, if you'd start us off.
Well, I'm a final year PhD student that's kind of taking up about 99% of all of my time and interest and energy at the moment as we're recording right now, and I have about a week and a half to finish, so we're in the crunch time for me at the moment. So besides that, I also do some sort of, blend between scholarly and entertainment writing on video games. I've written for PC Gamer, I've written for Rock Paper Shotgun, I've written for Unwinnable, and I also did some writing for Death of the Outsider, which I think you guys want to talk to me about, so that's cool.
It's pretty much the coolest thing I've ever heard is what it is.
Yeah, it's definitely a dream come true. Like, I don't even want to say it's a bit of a dream come true, or kind of, it's like 100% a dream come true. Really lucky, really happy that I ended up being brought onto this project. It kind of started a couple years ago. I guess it actually started with the first game because I played it and I loved it. And that was just before I started my PhD in 2013. And so I ended up, when I came to my first year at Durham University, I was moving transatlantically. I moved from the US to England. And so I immediately bought an Xbox, and I bought another copy of Dishonored. So I just wanted to have this game like with me, like throughout my time, and I didn't want to not play it at the time. So my interest in Dishonored and my interest in academia, or like my PhD topic, they've kind of evolved together. So that's where it starts. And then what happened was I got kind of involved in the fandom. I was writing little mini essays and little bits of fan fiction here and there. And I started chatting with Harvey Smith on Twitter, when he's very accessible on social media. And so it was really just easy to sort of, chat with him like in a friendly way. And there was a point where during my research, and I'm looking at Virginia Woolf and Angela Carter, who are two 20th century sort of feminist writers. And I'm looking at them through the lens of a 20th century French theorist named René Girard. And he writes quite a lot about scapegoating, about sacrifice, about how violence is kind of used in communities to prevent more destructive violence. So when I was researching that, I started thinking like, wait, this makes a lot of sense with what I know about Dishonored and what I've seen in the game and what I've thought about. And so I started writing kind of small essays to sort of compare these two ideas of scapegoating, ritual sacrifice, ideas of plague, and the sort of ritual means other communities in the past have performed to get rid of these sort of conditions like plague, where it just threatens to overcome communities. And then I wrote a tweet thread, and this is where a lot of the story starts that people know of. I wrote a tweet thread specifically about the outsider as an expression of ancient Greek pharmakos, which is a ritual sacrifice of some sort of marginalized member of the community. It could have been someone condemned to die, a criminal, or someone who's deformed. They had to have some sort of marker that set them outside of the regular everyday community. Everything that was going wrong in the community would essentially be blamed on this person. And through a highly ritualized murder or banishment, but usually murder, the society would create this moment of kind of unifying collective violence against the scapegoat, and through that would reaffirm their social boundaries and purge their community of whatever bad things they believed were going on. And all of that was informed by René Girard in my readings and my PhD research. I wrote this essay, and I wrote that on Twitter, and eventually got picked up by PC Gamer, and it got a little bit more widely known, but it was noticed by Harvey Smith, who I'd been chatting with for quite a while at that point. And that sort of got me my in to eventually write for Death of the Outsider, because they felt like I understood the characters well enough to come and do this. And obviously I also interviewed, and I also He had to convince the rest of the team that I was worth taking this chance on. And also I had to submit creative writing samples. It wasn't just my brilliance as an academic that got me here. They also liked my creative writing. And so I was brought onto the project through this sort of convoluted, meandering PhD plus video games sort of 4.5 years. So what I like to say is that Dishonored and Dishonored-related activities have been the greatest boon and the greatest bane to my PhD for the last 4.5 years. I ended up having to get an extension. I took like 6 months off to write this video game, but it's all been completely worth it. And I can't even get upset at myself for sometimes dithering and not working on my thesis, because I did end up doing this really cool thing, even if it sort of interfered with my academic, my grinding academic lifestyle. But yeah. So sorry, I went on a bit of a ramble there, but yeah, that's the whole story.
It's unfortunate that we have such a grind in academics that we're not really often allowed the opportunity to chase opportunities like this, and it's such an amazing one. I'm deeply grateful that you were able to do it.
I was really reluctant to tell my supervisor, but there was definitely a point where I had to, because I hadn't done any work in 2 months, and I was meeting up with her and being like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And so there was a point where I was like, "So I've been hired to work on a video game," and so she was actually really pleased. Like she was really happy that I was, because she'd known that I'd written, I contributed a chapter to a book about video games and how they've changed over the years, and it was an academic text, so I wrote a chapter for that. So she knew that I was interested in video games from an academic perspective, and also from a literary perspective, because that's what I do. So my supervisor kind of got spoilers for the game before anyone even knew it would have been announced yet. But I told her very tentatively, like, so there's this kind of, this outsider, and it makes sense. He's the pharmacos and like Gerard. And so I sort of explained to her why I liked it so much and why it seemed really relevant to what I was studying. And I sort of got her to understand what was going on. And that was just, I had this meeting with my supervisor in like a pub in Newcastle about 2 weeks after I came back from Lyon. I went to Lyon for a week to meet the team and to meet Anna McGill, the other writer on the project, and to kind of confer with the level designers and so on for what everyone's intentions were. And so that was really exciting. I think it was before, because I sat down with my supervisor at 10 p.m. in this pub, and I'm just like, yeah, so I'm leaving for France in like a couple days. Here's why. But no, she was really happy for me, and she understood that this was an opportunity that could lead to so many other amazing opportunities in games writing. And I think she's very understanding. She's like, I think she was just happy that one of her students finally like got a job. Like it's so rare, and and I'm sorry, but
don't be sorry.
It's true.
We're all either recovering academics or we're all
on the same leaky little boat. So I think she was just happy that I managed to affect some kind of miracle for my future in a way that many others do not. So I don't think she plays games. I don't think she really understands how important this is to me, but she's supportive. So that's all you need, is that she didn't try and like dissuade me and didn't say that it wasn't important, but she might not understand, but she gets what it means to me. So it's she's supportive. So I was very lucky.
Having that kind of an institutional support can mean the difference in so many scholars.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of people they go into it and then they just don't have that, or they don't have that backing, and it just crushes them.
Yeah.
Like it's just, if you don't have someone in your corner, like it's really tough. Like you spend a lot of time justifying what you're doing and justifying your research, and if you don't come in there with like a super strong sense of will and like, I know what I'm doing is valuable, and I'm tired. I'm fine. I'm ready to go to the mat to justify it, no matter what. If you don't go in with that and you don't have anyone in your corner, it can be really dispiriting. So it's really cool to hear that your supervisor was kind of was backing you on that.
Yeah, no, she's been great as a supervisor and as just a support through this process. Like I wasn't teaching during this time either, and she understood that I wasn't going to really produce any work for her on my thesis during this time, and we made like a very strict but flexible plan for everything that I would be doing immediately after this game. Didn't really factor in how low my productivity would be around the time of, the announcement and then the release, but did our best. And I think about, hopefully just a week and a bit away from submission at this point. So,
yeah, it's been a big few months.
Yeah, that's a huge few months.
Hopefully when this gets put up, it's not just like, I'm not going to listen to this and be like, oh, I was so naive. Like, oh, listen to last week Hazel thinking that she was going to get this done. No. So hopefully when I listen to this, I'll be like, yes, I made a plan and I did it. So,
we believe in you, future Hazel.
Like whispering prayers on this podcast.
Even if we're nothing but a preservation of innocence, I'm okay with that as well.
Stay gold last week, Hazel.
You were saying that, like, a bit about, you met with the level designers. Like, I guess at the point where you came onto the project, a lot of the bulk of the sort of the beat by beat stuff had been done, and it was more a matter of wrapping narrative around that, or was it like how did that give and take happen with the developers and and sort of the writing team?
What was it like?
I can only speak for Arkane, and Arkane is very narrative focused, despite the fact that they make primarily action games. They're not making RPGs. They're not making sort of BioWare style third person sort of brawling character kind of focused games. They're making action games, and Dishonored is primarily a stealth action game. So by the time I was brought on, the majority of the story had been settled. They had a rough outline of what was going to happen when they more or less knew the structure of how the story was going to be presented in terms of kind of dialogue and cutscenes and things like that. And the level designers had essentially mocked up all of the areas that we see now in the game. Bits and pieces were added and lost along the way, as any sort of game development process goes. But by the time I was brought on, Satchka Duval, the lead narrative designer over at Arkane, Leon, and Harvey Smith, the creative director, they had basically come up with the story of the game. And so when I was brought on, and when Anna McGill was brought on, we were explained the plot, and I was tremendously excited because it kind of aligned with what I saw as fundamental to the story and fundamental to The Outsider. I feel like, well, there are fans who sort of read my PC Gamer article, played the game, and sort of assumed that I came up with this story of like rescuing or sacrificing the outsider. I'm like, no, that wasn't me at all. I don't know, it just came out that way, and I was super excited to hear about it, all of it, because it made a lot of sense to me thematically, and it made a lot of sense to me as far as my research. So I definitely ended up drawing from my research and the bits and pieces that I was asked to write. So my sort of day-to-day working on the game involved a lot of kind of back and forth with Satchka and Harvey in terms of, they would tell me, Satchka especially would describe the scene, say roughly how long it had to be, what information needed to be imparted. And I'd be chatting at times with the level designers because there would often be information the player had to know about the level or about this puzzle or about this character that was crucial to the player progressing. And so I had to integrate that information into a lot of dialogue and kind of ambient stuff. And so Anna and I worked on that to convey the level designer's intent a lot of the time to the player. And so what I worked on primarily with Satchka and Harvey was the main character dialogue. So I worked on Billy Lurk's dialogue, Dowd's dialogue, and The Outsider. So the kind of major cutscenes were things that I worked on with Satchka and Harvey. And I typically had a fair amount of leeway. I was sort of explained how the scene needed to go, what things like the information that needed to be imparted, like say the cutscene with the outsider just after Billy Lurk has picked up the knife. That had to hit very specific, you had to give a certain amount of information, like Dowd is dead. That had to be imparted. That the knife is important to the outsider in this very specific way, that had to be imparted. And so I was asked to kind of write out these scenes, and they would be iterative, going back and forth with the lead narrative designer and with the creative director to kind of hammer it out, keep it consistent, and to keep it tight as well. But otherwise, beyond these kind of constraints and beyond the kind of, whatever small creative differences that we had, I was given a lot of leeway, and I was trusted with a lot. And I never had a moment where my thoughts were radically out of step with either Sachka or Harvey's. Like, we were very in sync. It was really exciting to be a part of that, where we all sort of understood what needed to happen and why. So that was pretty much my day-to-day was writing things like that. And that we did a lot of that quite early on, because recording schedules and animations and things, we had to get those done quickly so that we could move on and keep on schedule. But things like notes, I ended up writing a ton of notes later on. And Anna had been writing notes and dialogue for other NPCs and so on for the whole time, especially the three kind of main villains in the second and third level of the game. She did primarily all of those, which I think are fantastic. I love those characters. So I ended up writing quite a lot of notes towards the end of my time working them. And I worked on quite a bit of in the mind, the kind of academics in the mind, the dialogue and the notes are almost all entirely things that I worked on. I think you can tell sort of a character who says hermeneutics is like, did Hazel write that? Yeah, Hazel wrote that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your Twitter is fantastic. Just by and large, like, There's a tweet that I pulled up in preparation for this, like, yesterday. That was from, like, November 25th, and it is, "I still love that I got the line, 'Speculation is one of the many pitfalls which threatens the errant philologist into a video game.'"
I wrote that. I'm like, that is so much. I love it. And luckily, like, Sachka and Harvey were kind of on the same page with me in terms of how muchness I could get into this, like, academia-wise. There was one conversation where I was asked to sort of tone it down, and I did. And it was much better after I toned it down. It was sort of gibberish before that, but it's kind of academic jargon kind of mashed together. I thought that was funny, and it wasn't funny enough to anyone except for me. I thought that was hilarious, but yeah, I toned it down a bit. That's the conversation between the three scholars who are arguing about things like, hermeneutics of the self and delineation. And, like, I kind of joked that this was an argument between Derrida, Lacan, and Kristeva, and so that was those three characters. I saw one of my favorite fan responses was just like, "Oh, I heard this guy talking about hermeneutics of the self, and I had to stab that guy." Yeah, I understand. Yeah, no, I'm glad that inspired that feeling in you.
Who among us has not wanted to stab someone who's talking about the hermeneutics of the self?
And I really enjoyed working on that level because, for one, it sort of was a kind of parody of kind of academia, that we have these very secluded, very privileged spaces to talk about these things that do affect real people and can sometimes be very dire problems and situations that we kind of can talk through very peaceably. And we have that in the mind with this cult who've been debating the same subject for 4,000 years. And the subject is this guy we killed who is, still in the kind of death throes forever, which we've seen as sort of, we see as an acceptable sacrifice for our lavish lifestyle in this mine. So our lavish intellectual, ivory tower / silver mine that we created so that we could better, we created the foundations of the universe so that we could understand the foundations of the universe and then lord it over everyone forever. I love that theme of academic hubris that's at the heart of this game. And I was really glad that I could be a part of that and help convey that. And also that I could get phrases like hermeneutics of the self and into a video game.
That is a beautiful chance. Thank you on behalf of everyone for doing that.
It's that, and also the in-universe fan fiction that you can find in the bank. That was me. I also did that one because I had to.
Yeah, of course.
That was another one where I was given a lot of leeway, where it was the level designers wanted to have a couple of little Easter egg items for, longtime fans in the bank. And I wrote 2 pieces, and one of them was the Corvo Cider / fic banned by the Abbey on heretical grounds.
Oh my god! One of my favorite podcasts is Friends at the Table, which is run by Austin Walker, a similarly recovering academic. And my favorite moments in this. So it's an actual play podcast. If you've never listened to it, it's basically people play a tabletop role playing game and record it, and it plays like a radio play. And one of my, like, whenever Austin goes in on academics, like, or has an academic appear in the stories, which is very frequently, it's always like it's really fascinating, because on the one hand he's got like a bit of side eye for the people that are just all theory and no action, but also like recognizes that there's some values to some of the conversations that are taking place. It's just they need to circulate outside of that world.
Yeah.
And so the most interesting parts is where he kind of pushes those characters and they wind up meeting the rubber meeting the road. And that's absolutely, like, I don't know how many people who can write that who haven't, been in those sort of situations, in that space, and then also like know that there's a world outside and had the thrill of knowledge in their hands, and then just been like, I don't know how to make this go outside of these walls.
I think Sashka was a great lead for us. I was really happy to work with her, and she was great to work with. I think she definitely played to my strengths in kind of pushing for me to write these sort of academic texts, and I was having a blast. I loved doing things like that. I even offered, like, I wanted to add more to the library, and so I ended up writing that 4-part series of, like, Does the Outsider Speak? Which is a Spivak joke.
Jesus.
I remember, what was it? On my Twitter, I wrote, like, made a cheeky Spivak reference today. And then, like, months later, I could be like, by the way, this was about Death of the Outsider. It was not about my thesis. Like,
yeah.
I wrote that 4-part kind of academic text about these scholars not understanding why the outsider seems to speak to people who are downtrodden and have been wronged or have seen some sort of injustice done to them. But he doesn't talk to us. Like, why doesn't he talk to us? I don't get it. It's like, yeah, because you suck. That's why. Like, because you're super boring.
Because you're the ones doing the things that make other people downtrodden.
Exactly. So I think that was really fun to write, because I could take my sort of academic knowledge that I had turned onto Dishonored, several years ago, and I could be like, what if I was a scholar in universe? Like, what if I was doing that? And I could write these little notes, or just, man, I'm remembering all the little bits and pieces that I wrote. Like, there was one where it was someone muttering to themselves as they're taking notes. And so I wrote this whole little, through their mutterings, you can tell that they're the, either the assistant or amanuensis of one of the higher up scholars in this group. And she's just like, oh, his name is on all of my papers, and I'm taking credit for all my research, and doing all of his corrections, and why am I out here? Why can't he just keeps in his study, he never leaves anymore. Like, it was very cathartic to sort of vent all of my little academic woes onto this game.
Yeah, I think also, Dishonored series, and I think, like, immersive sims in general, if you look back to, like, the original Deus Ex, there was a lot of, like, textual references, quotes from different theorists and whatever, and I always loved that part of them, and I feel like an academic is a good fit for that, because we're in love with just these weird little marginalia, or encouraging people to, like, draw these connections between isolated little fragments of text.
Yeah, absolutely.
To kind of build a bigger meaning out of it. One of
Arkane's other games, Prey, does that a lot for me, especially because they're talking about mimics, and they use the word mimesis specifically, and this is something René Girard talks about quite a lot. And so I remember just reading the word mimesis, and then, like, the bit of the Bible passage about seeing through a mirror darkly and, seeing face to face and so on. And the idea of mimicry and seeing and escalating violence between groups that can't really communicate but end up kind of mimicking one another in this way, and creating this sort of crisis of undifferentiation, like, can't tell them apart anymore because they both affected this violence to this extreme level, and this sort of crisis and scapegoating and so on, and all of these things that Girard does. And so when I was playing this game, I felt like it was winking at me. It was just like, you get it? And I'm like, I do get it. This is great. I really, really love this
for me.
Yeah, this, like, very consistent theme throughout Prey. And that you also get in Dishonored with scapegoating and ritual murder and exclusion and so on. And so that was really, I think, I just really love Arkane. I just love Arkane games. That they have this kind of texture and this kind of textual detail to them, that where obviously, you can just play them for fun, like a good novel. You can read a good novel for fun, but you can also make these connections, and you can draw out these little interesting bits. They're there if you want to see them, and they're there if you want to read deeply. And I love doing that. And that for me is a good time, because recovering academic, etc. And so it's great. I just love these games let you do that. And so that was really exciting and really fun to have that awareness working with Death of the Outsider and working with Sachka and Harvey to put across this idea of scapegoating and blame and so on. And so that was really fun. Yeah.
Like, I think for me, one of the things I say often is, you know, like, because I'm a little bit broken inside, for me, a sign of like really good writing or a really good thing is a thing like once I'm done or once I've like kind of engaged with it, I want to go and run and write about it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I felt the same way like playing the first Dishonored, where I was just like, I just come off of a bender of rereading Moby Dick and like the cetology chapters and stuff like that, like seeing this sort of how that had been reflected materially in the game and stuff like that was really interesting to me. I didn't wind up writing anything, but I still like, I came away every time I played that game, I was like, oh man, I need a half an hour to go and talk myself out of like going and just spending an hour or two writing something that it has nothing to do with any of the thing that I have to, like all my pressing deadlines. And I felt the same way about your PC Gamer piece, where you kind of go through the pharmacon and stuff like that. Because like on our side, or at least on sort of my educational background, recovering lit student, but also doing like digital humanities and all that stuff, we kind of read a lot of Bernard Stiegler, and he also writes about pharmacon, but he usually talks about like technology as both like an illness and a cure.
Right.
And so it kind of left me sitting there going like, is the Outsider a technology? What is this? Like, what about all the things that they use in the world that are like both a poison and a cure? And then, like, yeah, just sort of that replicating and tweaking that.
I never
that,
thought of it that way.
Yeah,
because I think in Dishonored 2 especially, you do get magic sort of commodified and used as a technology, in that it's used to kind of access other means and ways of living. That's really cool. Dang, okay. Nice. I'm still writing a little bit about Dishonored here and there. I find Dishonored 2, again, with mimesis and ideas of doubles and, you know, affecting the world through your double. And I'm hoping to write a bit more about that after I have all these plans after my thesis. And it's just, when is it gonna... I'm getting married like 3 days after my submission as well. Like, I'm just doing all of the life goals at the same time.
That's busy.
Like,
You beat one of our essays editors by about like half a week or so. He defended his dissertation and then he got married the next week.
Oh man!
And he like was completely calm and composed the entire time. And I'm like, I don't know how you're doing this. You're not human.
It's like, are you screaming inside? What's going on?
Yeah.
Luckily, I will have a bit of downtime between my submission and my Viva. Looking forward to that. Well, I mean, I moved back to America and I started a new job, but like after that,
yeah, downtime always seems to be about like 2 or 3 months out.
Yeah.
And it never seems to get closer.
Downtime is like a full 9-to-5 job. That's my downtime. Like actual structured work time is my downtime now. Like, it's going to be great. I can't wait.
Yeah. So you are starting a new job. Can you say anything about that? Or
I can't right now. I can't. I would love to say something, but I can't at the moment. So hopefully once I start kind of early January, I'll let everybody know. Again, I'm going to listen to this and like, oh, 1 week ago, Hazel, like a lot of people have guessed, but yeah, anyway, I can't really say.
We can be good. We can be patient and good and wait until January.
Thank you. And then 3 days after I start my job, it's my birthday. And like,
oh my God, Hazel.
Oh, it's going to be great. Man. I can't wait. I'm just doing all the life goals at once.
Oh my God.
Then I'm done. No more life goals. It's done.
Yeah.
And then 3 weeks later, I'll have my funeral and it will be great.
Well, it's good to have goals, right?
Yeah. It's good to have something to look forward to.
Feels like that sometimes, for sure. We've kind of been touching on this, but I'm always really, really interested to think about kind of the games that we choose for scholarship, because sometimes it feels like your brain just latches onto an idea. It's almost like the game picks you instead of you picking the game to analyze it. That's kind of the process by which things gather our scholarly attention, because we're players, but we are also academics. So it's always really interesting to me to see which parts of games grab us like that. It seems like Dishonored has grabbed you for a lot of different reasons, and maybe that's why it's so deep for you.
Yeah, I think what happened with Dishonored for me was because it followed so closely along with my research. It ended up just dovetailing really well. I haven't tried to look at too many other titles in the same way. I wrote an article for Unwinnable. It was about blood drinking in medieval Catholic ritual in relation to Bloodborne, and how the language of Bloodborne mimics in sort of interesting ways the medieval conception of Christ as food. And I kind of hit on that just because I read for fun Holy Feast, Holy Fast by Carolyn Walker Bynum, who is a theologian and historian. Or, is she a theologian? I don't know. She writes about Christ. And she writes about kind of women's religiosity. And so I read this book, which was fascinating, and I loved it. And it had absolutely nothing to do with anything I was researching, but I thought it was really cool. I was playing Bloodborne around the same time. And it was like Bloodborne obviously sort of affects kind of Catholic atmosphere. And the idea of kind of sacred or good or kind of sacramental blood was something that interested me quite a lot, and meshed, again, dovetailed very well with what I was reading at the time. And so that sort of idea of a kind of corporeal religion is something that struck me as quite medieval and very Catholic. And so I wrote a little article about that. I wrote something for, what was it? It was Unwinnable again. They let me do all sorts of things. I wrote about, I think it was reciprocity and giving in Mad Max Fury Road, and how it was a film about, basically about compassion, about showing someone compassion, that you're taking a chance by showing a stranger compassion, and how that can escalates and plays out, and, and the kind of mirror scenes we have throughout Mad Max of people who are having something kind of violently taken away from them, and then later in the film that they give it to someone freely, and that's this big character arc that all these characters have. And so was just something that struck me as I was watching it, and I watched it like 20 times, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And then I wrote something like, and like I was very obsessed with Bloodborne, like something about it grabbed me. And then I eventually connected it to the Bynum text. And so, yeah, I think it's obsession first, and then the scholarly bit kicks in. Like when I feel like I have to justify why this is so interesting to me.
That's how it happens.
But then I got obsessed with Dragon Age Inquisition, and I haven't written anything about any of that. So that might be for a whole different reason. I don't know.
I just finally gave up and decided to write about Dragon Age in my dissertation instead of pretending like I was just like, nope, this is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I always wonder if that's kind of partially an impulse of scholars or writers in general, maybe, of just I feel this way, and I feel strongly. I don't know why, and I have to take this thing apart and figure out why.
Why do I like this question mark?
Yeah, I'm really lucky because my PhD thesis is on my two favorite authors, and I think a part of why I came up with this idea to kind of compare them and look at them together with this critical lens is because I really like these writers, but why do I like these two? They're so different. But my thesis, spoilers, they're not actually that different.
Oh,
actually,
no.
Well, they're super different, but not when you look at it like this.
Thesis spoilers are the best spoilers.
Spoilers, yeah. Spoilers, I make an argument, and it's okay. My supervisor can follow it, and that's all I want. Liking something a lot, and then sort of an impulse to justify it, I suppose. I don't know. I'm trying to. One of my friends who I met at Nine Worlds, which is this kind of half conference, half convention sort of event in London, and one of my friends who I met there, she looks at Christ figures in video games, and so she's looking at how religion works in Dragon Age and all of that, and sort of Andraste and all of that, and I'm just begging her, play Dishonored, play Death of the Outsider, you'll love it. Oh, there's a pieta.
I put it in there for you.
Oh, look at it. Eldritch Twink Jesus, it's there. Just look.
Twink Jesus.
It's there.
Oh my god.
That's the podcast title, right?
That phrase is gonna follow me around forever because I keep saying it.
Yep.
But it just makes a lot of sense, all right? I promise it makes sense. Just read my dissertation.
I think we're all on board for it.
Yeah. Have you read any of the sort of reviews or anything like
Oh
that?
yeah,
Or
I read every
following
single one of them. Are you kidding?
Okay. Yeah.
This is probably something I'm going to have to learn to deal with. I really liked the critical response was great. I was really happy with the reviewers that looked at it and evaluated it. And so I think, yeah, they picked up on, I mean, I would kind of scroll through the gameplay bits. I'm like, yeah, gameplay. What did you think about the narrative? And I mean, only a handful of critics actually would look at that at any length in their reviews. But the ones that did, I think, definitely understood what we were doing, or like it affected them in a way they couldn't quite grasp at the time. And a lot of these things, like, they're written immediately after like one playthrough, or are pushed out like on release and so on. So hopefully these people are mulling the game over a bit more. But I was pleased. I read all of them. Yeah, I read every single one. I'm gonna have to like tone that down probably in my future, but I like obsessively read everything. I read every lukewarm take about Death of the Outsider to my not great, health benefit, but I really wanted to know what people were thinking about it, because I really loved what we did. I was really proud of it. I was really happy with what we ended up with and how it was presented. All these constraints aside, I think we did really well. And so I wanted people to pick up on things that we put down. I wanted people to discuss them, and I wanted to be, a part of that discussion, basically. I want to be like, hey, you guys talking about Death of the Outsider? What'd you think? Which my friends did not hear the end of it for like a month after. I'm like, hey guys, what'd you think of this bit? Did you reach this bit yet? Like, what did you think? I thought it was this. And like, I was really obnoxious with my friends. And so I did my absolute best, because I'm still like marginally a part of the fan spaces for Dishonored. And so I had to try my absolute best to kind of sidle in and be like, what'd you think about Death of the Outsider? And not like, and just not get involved in the actual discussion. I mean, I didn't like make pseudonyms and kind of start conversations, but I read a lot of people's evaluations on Tumblr, like the good and the bad. And when people got it, when people like picked up what we put down, and when it affected them, or they really enjoyed it, or made them think, that was really rewarding to see people engaging with the game that way. And so that was great. And obviously there were people who really didn't like it, who are huge fans of Dowd and didn't like how the character was handled, or didn't want to play as Billy, or, didn't like this or that gameplay, or thought it was too short, or thought there weren't enough cutscenes. And it's like, sorry. But still, it was just really rewarding to see people engaging with the game in this way, because this is my first kind of opportunity to see a wide response to something that I'd worked on. And so I did take some things quite personally, especially because the amount of things that get blamed on the writers when something goes wrong in the game, and people don't like a certain thing, and like, oh, those writers. And it's like, guys, it's a whole team. It's not just, two people ruining the game for you. I'm really sorry. Like, so that was a little frustrating to kind of see that sort of discourse, but it didn't diminish how I felt about the game. I still really love it. I still think it's really interesting, and I still think it says what we wanted it to say, and I am really proud of it.
What I found really interesting from the response was Patrick Klepek saying that he played through all the other Dishonoreds like very stealthy, no death, and then Death of the Outsider, he just murdered everyone.
Nice.
Like he just, and it was like, and narratively, like he was just saying, like he felt as though the game had hit a tipping point, and there was something in the way that it kind of presented itself, and the way that the story kind of unfolded for him, that he was like, no, like this is it. This is where I'm going with this. And was just unrepentant about how nasty he was going to go with it.
Death of the Outsider and Billy as a protagonist is very radically different from the other games, I feel. And I think that's in part because a lot of at least Dishonored 1 and Dishonored 2, the DLCs for Dishonored 1 maybe a little bit less, or I don't know, Corvo, Emily, and Dowd as protagonists, they're all going through a moral crisis. They're being asked to respond to something that they've never encountered before. With Corvo, it's being imprisoned. With Emily, it's losing her throne. And with Dowd, it's feeling guilt over what he feels he'd never felt guilty for a contract killing before. So they're encountering new things, and they're asked to respond to those things, and they're asked to make moral choices. And so with that, the chaos system comes into play, and the game things are different depending on how you respond and whether you're violent or non-violent and so on. But with Billy, she already has a moral compass. Like, she's not undergoing a moral crisis. What she's doing is she's reacting to Dowd and to the world at large. And it's not really a question for her of how she'll respond. It's, what am I being asked to do here? Like, it's finding that question. And that's why that question is at the end and not kind of throughout. So with Billy, like, again, she has her own moral code. She's seen the worst of Dunwall. She's seen the worst of Karnaca. That's who she is, and that's where she's lived her whole life. And so she's not feeling ambivalent about murdering people. Like, some people just gotta die. Like, it sucks, but, this is the world we live in. And so she brings that understanding to her relationship with Dowd and her relationship with the outsider throughout the game. And I find that really interesting because it's a departure from the previous games. And I remember, like, I read this. This is the worst because I can't remember who wrote this. It was one of the kind of bits of analysis that I read, and I think it was a friend of mine on Twitter actually wrote about how the protagonist's relationship to the rats sort of signifies how they view the world. Where in Dishonored 1, they're plague carriers, they're a nuisance. In the lore, like the plague rats were brought in to sort of decimate the indigent and the wastrel part of society, and that they're part of this kind of unwanted class that you can kill with impunity, and in fact you should, because they'll kill you back. Whereas in Dishonored 2, you can use the rats, you can eat them. Like, you can eat them in the first game, but in the second game, they don't really have the plague. They're just there. They're a part of the city. You can get attacked by rat swarms, but they don't have that kind of thematic link with the plague in the second game. And so the rat eating becomes more like you can use the rats as a resource. And we have that connection again to the poor. Like, the rats are showing up in these poverty-stricken areas, and it's like, the poor as a plague, the poor as a resource. All right, that's, I guess, how Corvo and Emily see the rats, which, has this kind of ugly class implication for both of them. But that's where they're situated within the context of the world. These are upper-class people, and, like, even though Corvo was sort of a low-born person, he ended up living in a palace and so on, and ended up, fathering the next empress, etc. Whereas with Billy, she can listen to the rats. The rats tell her things. They're her friends. Like, they call her a big, ugly friend. Like, that's her relationship to the rats. And so it's quite different. It's massively different to Corvo and Emily. And so I really, really, I can't take credit for coming up with that. And I can't even take credit for noticing that when I was working on any of it. Because Sachka came up with the rat whispers idea, which Harvey loved, I loved. Like, it's a great concept. And so that radically changed, your relationship to the rats, and therefore your relationship to the street as a place and as a being of the street and of the public sphere. And I really, really enjoyed that thematic link that player picked up on. That was really exciting to read. And it was like, kudos to Sachka for coming up with that concept, because that ended up meshing super, super well with the overall themes of the game and how Billy is presented within the game as this kind of lower class, more streetwise person who is asked to make a choice about another sort of outcast, streetwise person. Yeah, I just really love that. And I think I'm really annoyed that I actually can't remember who did that, because I think I invited them to my going away party. And I think it was Ash Nye Automata, NYAAUTOMATA on Twitter. So definitely go and follow them, because they do some good analysis in this vein. So yeah, sorry. But I just love that idea. And having that sort of, it was the AV Club who, I forget who again, AV Club ran an article about how the class tensions of the game finally boil over in Death of the Outsider. And I really, really, really enjoyed that, because that just really kind of clicked with me and my understanding of the game. This is great. More of this, please. Yes, thank you. I will take 400 of these. Yes. It was very, very rewarding to read things like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me, like, to have the first game in the series that doesn't feature Corvo or Emily, like, really prominently, really at so much. Having Billy here and having that different perspective on this world is really, I think, helpful and valuable for people who want to get a hold of what's going on here more.
I guess we've circled around the relationship between like fan fiction and criticism and developers. I think the conversation's kind of changed significantly even since the first Dishonored came out, where it was like, I think the most prominent discussion I saw about that game was, you can beat this in 3 hours if you stab people, which was like, cool, I guess. That's not, but and to see like, you know, that stuff kind of build up and see the conversation sort of shift and take a little bit more of a like more pointed look at issues of class and some of the moral and ethical implications of what you're doing. And some of that actually did bubble up around the first game, when you can sort of send someone off to a work camp forever as opposed to killing them. Mm. But I was kind of curious about sort of like the relationship sort of between fan fiction and fan communities and sort of the criticism and sort of how that, I guess you're kind of a product of that, and that you've sort of existed in those communities and then also kind of cross that line a little bit into the development side of things. But like, did you get any sort of impression from the people that you've kind of had contact with at Arkane in terms of how much they really, you don't want to give too much stock necessarily, because then you're going to be, you know, like, everybody's in love with everybody, I don't know, all of the slash fictions are true. How much of that is, how much do they kind of keep tabs on that, and whether or not there's like a set process for that or anything like that?
I don't know. It's very individual. I mean, I don't know. That's hard to answer. I know that Harvey Smith especially is very kind of active with meeting fans, talking with fans on social media and at cons and so on. And I think a lot of fans would feel very perturbed knowing that their work could be read and by people who actually, you know, worked and created kind of content for the games that they admire so much. Like, I've written a handful of fan fiction for Dishonored. I would be mortified if anyone saw that. Like, absolutely mortified. I remember the last day I was in Lyon with Anna and the rest of the team, and I went out for a drink with Satchka, and she mentioned, "Oh, I've read your fan fiction." And I'm like, I went white as a sheet. And I'm like, "Which one?" And she's like, "There's more than one?" I'm like, No, there isn't.
Of course not.
And so that was fine, because I knew which one she'd found, and it was okay. But it was just like, oh goodness, I'm so sorry. Like, because there's a lot of different ways of approaching fan fiction. A lot of people do it just for fun, or just sort of exploring relationships between characters who don't have one in the games, or don't meet, or are made up, or whatever. And I did some of that. But I also did sort of exploratory fan fiction. A lot of fan fiction and a lot of fan works and things explore bits of games or novels or TV shows or movies or so on that they weren't satisfied with in whatever media that they were watching. And so, like, for me and for a lot of people, I used fan fiction to sort of explore ideas or characters or spaces or places or concepts that were hinted at in the game but were just vague enough that I wanted to know more, but there wasn't any more, and so I was going to write it. So, and I did that with Dragon Age Inquisition. I wrote this massively involved fanfic about the kitchen in Skyhold, because I'm really into medieval cookery and really into medieval kitchen spaces. So I just like, that kitchen doesn't make any sense. How can you cook anything in there? And so I wrote about like, why would you have a castle? How are you going to feed a castle in the middle of nowhere? And so I just wrote about like the community that would have to grow up in the valley underneath Skyhold, and the kitchen, and the kind of people who would be working there, especially as it became a very strategic kind of diplomatic court, like the kind of dishes that they would have to prepare. And so and then there was a romance with the character and whatever, and like, but the kitchen was the main thing. And so what I wrote for Dishonored, and I ended up never putting it online, it was just something I shared with a couple of friends, is I was really intrigued by the idea of a parliament in Bristol and how that would function in relation to the imperial seat. And so I wrote quite a lot of like political intrigue fanfic.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Let me tell you, it was not. It was bad. It was not good. But I had a good time writing it, and I was writing it for some friends. God, it was like 70,000 words long. It was some stupid number of like, yeah, I just, look, this was in my first year of my PhD, the year that no one does any work. So obviously I wrote a novel-length fanfic about Bristolian Parliament. Like, God damn it. But it was fun to write. I had a good time. It was something that I shared with some friends. It was a little fan community. Then I never looked at it again because it was garbage. And then I got more interested in other bits of the game. And like, as I was developing my academic ideas and the whole story with, looking at Pharmacos and so on, And so that became interesting, and I was writing that basically the PC Gamer article is like, nonfiction fan fiction for me is pretty much. I guess right up until the point where I was actually hired, you could say that like the writing samples that I sent to were fan fiction. And I did actually plagiarize a little bit of myself and a fic that I'd written ages ago for one of my samples. For me, fan fiction was always about exploring something that didn't get enough space in the game. And I think that's how a lot of people approach it. Either with what could happen when these characters smooch, or like what, or like this kitchen is garbage, I'm going to write a better kitchen, like things like that. That I think fan fiction is always at least a little bit kind of exploratory and engages with the text in an interesting way. That I think was definitely formative in how I approached video games generally. Always looking for those little untold spaces. And Dishonored encourages that. There's a billion tiny stories across every Dishonored game. And so it does sort of encourage you to think about the kind of different millions of regular people who live across the Isles. And I found that really interesting.
Glad that you get to put that in there for us.
You're talking about kitchens and stuff like that. There's a critical distance. There's a regular. They were looking for pieces on food in video games for a while. I don't know if they're still doing that.
I already wrote a piece for Unwinnable about the kitchen of Skyhold. Yeah.
Damn.
I was very magnanimous. I'm like, it's not a functioning kitchen, but it's the idea of a kitchen.
Yeah.
It's a cozy space, which, any medieval kitchen can't be a cozy space. You die of grease inhalation, but it's kind of the idea of a nice cozy nook by a fire. And so I liked that, and that does sort of inform my fan fiction, is about the kitchen as a sort of warming, cozy, familiar space. But it's also, it's the heart of any sort of medieval fort. And so, but fun fact, most medieval kitchens would be in a separate building because rather than kind of in the main kind of keep area, and that's not true of Skyhold. And the reason it would be an outbuilding is because when you have a place that has, the controlled use of fire, you don't want that to get anywhere else in the house. So that's why a lot of medieval kitchens don't survive, because they had a tendency to burn down. But little medieval cookery fun fact for you.
Things we learned. We are unfortunately out of time here. So thank you so much for coming and talking with us and sharing these stories and experiences. And this has been spectacular.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been a really good chat. And I will continue shitposting on Twitter as normal.
Yes. I look forward to it very much.
There you go. End podcast.
Yeah.